Tonight we continue our study on the 10 Commandments. We're up to commandment number 5. There it is. I was looking for my clicker. We don't have PowerPoint, maybe? Yeah, that's all right. I was going to say we'll click, but there's nothing here to click, but we'll get those going momentarily. Here we go. There we are. That's the class schedule. Since it is graduation season, you can start by saying, "Oh." Yeah, which one? Well, which guy? The guy in the red suit or the other guy? This is the last of our baby boys to graduate. Kindergarten graduation was 17 years ago. Saturday, we'll do it again. He'll be in another red outfit like that, and Dad will be crying probably even more. But anyways, to our high school graduates and college graduates and all those folks, we're again proud of you. And Sunday morning, we'll look at what I'm going to call maybe God's graduation speech. The book of Ecclesiastes is a very proper and fitting study at that transition point in life. But that helps us introduce tonight's commandment: honor your father and your mother. And I'm thankful for the three of mine who have. This picture, if someone were to ask me what's your favorite picture of your family, it would probably be this one, even though none of us are looking at the camera. And that's a good thing, at least in my case. For the other four, maybe not so much. But we were unaware last year at the lectureship at Freed Hardeman. They just take pictures. Of course, they post those on social media and other things to try to advertise and market and things like that. Well, someone, I guess one of the photography majors or otherwise, snapped this picture from the balcony. Those of you that have been in Lloyd Auditorium know the vantage point that it's shot from. But we're listening to one of the evening lectures, I assume, since Adrian Anderson are there with Adam and Amy and I. But that picture maybe would be among my favorites, because the boys are doing that which we've tried to instill within them to do, to listen and to learn and to certainly obey God's will. And you might have something similar in that in your family that you appreciate. But tonight, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. That's the full expression of it found in Exodus 20, verse 12, and again in Deuteronomy 5, verse 16. The New Testament equivalent that we'll see in the latter part of our lesson from Ephesians 6, 1-4, Paul will tell us, of course, the importance of this command still. A couple of quotations in your workbook, and if you don't have a workbook, we've still got some somewhere. I think they're out there in the foyer. Pick up one. If you know of somebody that would benefit from the study, pick up and give. Get one for them. They do no good to stay out there in the racks and collect dust. So please feel free to do that, and you can even tell them they can watch the recordings on YouTube if they want to follow along. I think most of the lessons are pretty self-explanatory. They read in such a way that you don't even have to have my additional comment to them. So please feel free to grab those on your way out. But here's a couple of quotations. I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on frivolous youth of today. For certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was young, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders, but the present youth are exceedingly disrespectful and impatient of restraint. You say, well, that guy knows what he's talking about. Yeah, that's the way it is in 2024. Well, that's also the way it was, apparently, in Greek culture, according to Hesiod, a Greek poet who lived about 700 to 800 years before Jesus was born. So now almost 3,000 years ago, that's what he said about the young people of his day. Here's another, a little bit more recent. Quote, the world is passing through troublous times. We would amen that. The young people of today think of nothing but themselves. Again, maybe an amen or two. They have no reverence for parents or old age. They are impatient of all restraint. They talk as if they knew everything, and what passes for wisdom with us is foolishness with them. As for the girls, they are forward, immodest, and unladylike in speech, behavior, and dress. Now, he didn't say anything about the boys, but I'm not trying to be, discriminatory or misogynist or anything like that. I guess for political correctness disclaimers, but that, not a modern quote either. It's a little bit more recent. It's only about 800 years old. A guy by the name of Peter the Hermit With a name like that, you can imagine how grumpy he was, but he was a Roman Catholic priest that lived in southern France in the 13th century. Well, again, what's the purpose of those quotations? Only to show us that if today we're, grumpy and feel like things aren't as they should be, and, we want to complain about the state of our culture, then know that it's happened many times before. And plenty of folks through the ages have thought much of what maybe we have thought when we look at the way things are currently. But honor your father and your mother. This command, although it's not stated like this anywhere in Scripture, usually as we try to look at the commands themselves, we typically define the first four as having a vertical relationship. That is, our relationship to these commands are vertical in that they pertain to our relationship with God. Vertical, if you will, this way. Beginning with this fifth command, though we change to a horizontal orientation, if you will, and this is how these commands affect our relationships with one another, with our fellow human beings. Now, this and the previous command are interesting as that they are the only two that are stated in positive terms. They are stated in a positive way. Here is what you should do. The rest of them are the more familiar, thou shalt nots. But these are the positive. Remember the Sabbath day, and we talked about what that included last time we were together. And then for tonight, honor your father and mother. This command is also the first commandment with promise. Now that command with promise is how Paul understands the last part of Exodus 20 verse 12 and the last part of Deuteronomy 5:16, so that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. That's a promise attached to that command. And the other commandments, while there are stipulations, if you will, or more so we might say consequences, for instance, with the very beginning, you shall have no other gods before me, number one, and then number two, do not make for yourself any carved image, and don't bow down to them, because I'm a jealous God. I visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generations. There will be consequences and ramifications for disobedience, but this one, there's a positive aspect included, that you may live long in the land. In Deuteronomy 5:16, here, that your days may be long and that it may be well with you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. A slight expansion. And as I said, we'll expand on that thought a little bit later. This command, like the others, is largely neglected in our world today. I guess it would be interesting if we had the time and just went person to person and I were to ask in an informal survey, which command do you feel is the one most violated or most transgressed today? Which command, do you think people violate more than any other? I don't know if this one would rank number one or not, but maybe on my list it would. Thankfully, again, not everyone, and even we might console ourselves by saying, I'm not guilty of murder. I'm not really guilty of stealing, even though when we talk about that, we'll maybe see that as more expansive than we might believe. Well, I'm not going to make an idol. I'm certainly not going to be so foolish as to craft something with my own handiwork and then bow down to it as if it made me instead of me making it. And the Sabbath day, it's no longer applicable in the Christian age, as we talked about, so we can kind of eliminate it from consideration. But maybe this one, honor your father and mother. Universally, there may be almost, if you will, the sense that most people neglect it or think it to be of little significance. But it is not. It's a big deal. And that's something we're going to see again, no matter our age or station in life. It's not dependent on any of those external factors. As the family goes, maybe you've heard someone say, so goes the nation, or otherwise. This divine institution, that is the home, of course, is what God first formulated in the Garden of Eden when Eve was presented to Adam. And it was so that she would be a comparable helper, a complement, something that he needed. And he understood his need. Not because God had in some way overlooked Adam's need for a companion, It wasn't the case that, God had made some sort of error in His omission, but I think it was purposeful so that as Adam names the animals, he sees that each has its complement, but he looks around and doesn't see his. Until, of course, God performing that divine surgery from His rib, fashioning Eve and presenting her to Adam. And then I've told you this before, and it's something that those who have studied the original language much more than I have, which would be almost any amount, but those who are experts suggest that it's really an exclamation of great joy when Adam said, hey, that's what I've been looking for in essence. Wow, this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She'll be called a woman. She was taken out of man. And God gave them the command to be fruitful and multiply. And so, of course, that was the building block of society and civilization. And if it is to be continually built and maintained, then we have to give proper adherence to the regulations of God. Well, as it relates to now this particular command, I found this quotation, and as I noted for you in your workbook or on your handout, I do not agree with his theology in any way, but it's not an endorsement of that. But I think he makes this astute observation. John Paul II said, quote, "As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. With regard to the family, society urgently needs to recover an awareness of the primacy of moral values, which are the values of the human person as such, thus recapturing the ultimate meaning of life and its fundamental values." And of interest, he spoke those words, I think, the best I could tell, somewhere in the early 1980s. And so certainly that's true. And now, 40 years later, if you will, we see many of the problems in our society, at least partially the root of those problems might be this lack of respect for the home and for the order and authority that should characterize it. And you don't have to come to the present. You could look back all through history and see the failures of different civilizations and how many of them had at least the contributing factor of their breakdown of the home and the family unit. You can observe that in the Roman Empire. You can observe that in other, like I said, cultures and civilizations. If you wanted to have history bear that out for you, it would be an easy research project. Now, to give you a little bit more of a just perspective on what's going on, a lack of respect and obedience to parents by children is evident. Again, if we were to simply ask our public school teachers tonight, give me one example, they'd say, I can't give you just one. I can give you one from, before lunch today, and I can give you three more that happened after lunch, and, a million between now and when school started back in August of last year. But what happens when authority is ignored at home? What happens then? Well, again, in the 1940s, the Department of Education published a little, report of sorts. And here were the top disciplinary problems in 1940. Now, I won't ask which of you were in school and, that you were guilty of these. So I'm not going to do that tonight to embarrass you. But maybe if you were around back then, maybe if you remember some of these as being disciplinary problems in your school days: talking, chewing gum, making noise, running in the halls, breaking in line, wearing improper clothing, and not putting trash in the wastebaskets. Teachers, would it be a dream if those were the problems you had to worry about today? I see some of them nodding their head. Yeah, that'd be a dream. That'd be great if that were the problems we faced today. Well, guess what? 70 years later, the condition of education, 2010, it was a government funded report, research done and presented to the Department of Education, and then they released it to the public. And you can find it online in PDF format. You can download it if you want to look at it. It's, I think it's a couple of hundred pages in length. But I just, thumbed through. I didn't thumb through it with my actual thumb. I thumbed through it with my mouse on the computer. And among the things that I noticed that kind of jumped out after I did just that brief survey is that 85% of public schools reported at least one incident of specific crime that rose to a level necessary to inform the police. a crime, that had to be mandatorily reported to the police. Now, I realize that, some of that maybe is due to the cause and the difference in laws. To my knowledge, all of the fisticuffs that I saw take place in my middle school and high school days were never reported to the authorities. I'm sure parents were, informed and some other issues, but I never remember law enforcement actually showing up, to take any further action. I'm sure that's changed today. We had one janitor at the high school, and he was a big guy. He looked like he had been a bouncer, and he had Popeye forearms because he ran the buffing machine. But he, if two guys just couldn't get along, he said, okay, he'd take them over to one corner. We had this one big, long, I mean, tell you, kind of like a half-moon hallway with the commons area in the middle. And so he knew right where to take them. He said, okay, boys, settle it. And he'd let them, sit there and beat on each other for 3 or 4 minutes. And then one of the female teachers would come out of her classroom, what's happening? He'd say, bring it up. What are you boys doing? Why shouldn't you do that? And he was the one that encouraged it, the whole time. But usually, after they both got a bloody lip, they, hugged it out. Yeah, I'm okay. You're okay. You can go out with Susie this Saturday. I'll take her out next Saturday, or whatever. It was solved. But now, 85% of public schools, only 15% say that there was not some incident that they had to report to law enforcement. Out of those incidents then, from that 85%, 3/4, 75% said there was at least one violent incident. And I was curious, what was that? Well, read the footnotes in the report and they tell you what it is. A violent incident, as defined in this particular report, was either rape, sexual battery, physical altercations involving a weapon, knife, gun, otherwise, robbery, distribution, possession, or use of illegal drugs or alcohol, and such like. Yeah, Clyde mentions watching the news and watching young people just cause mayhem of all sorts, and that's school, stores, wherever. And breaking windows and tearing property all to pieces. That's the world we live in. So, with this command then, honor your father and your mother, seemingly being ignored, let's ask the question, how do we do that? What does that involve? And, what are the ramifications for today, either adherence to this or refusal to obey? And then some discussion questions that hopefully we'll be able to get through as we get toward the end of the lesson. What did God mean by honor our parents? On the back page, that's the question that is posed. And of interest, when you hear that word honor, you might think of respect and reverence and even obedience, and that's true. The interesting word in the original language here of Hebrew is kabod. And it's a verb that means to make or to be made heavy. To make heavy. Now, that's just kind of a weird picture to try to put in your mind, but see if you can try to wrestle with that for a moment. To make heavy. It's a bit of an idiom, but it's the idea that some things should carry weight. Some things, should be significant. Some things should be, appreciated in a greater way maybe than others. And so this idea of honoring parents, give them weight, give them reverence, understand their position, if you will. And interestingly, you're probably not surprised that word is used in other places to describe other things that likewise are due honor. And you can study that on your own. Well, how do we honor our parents? Here's a number of ways. Let's just read these verses for us. Before you get to Luke chapter 2, let's read Deuteronomy chapter 21. Again, Moses is speaking now to the children of the parents who had died in the wilderness because of their unfaithfulness to God. And it would be hoped that that generation of children who watched their parents die were trained by their parents prior to their death to be obedient so that they would pass on that instruction but it seems that Moses wants to caution them. And maybe that was a failure because of their parents and otherwise, or just simply because this is a restatement again of that law that God first gave to Moses. Moses again reiterates it for emphasis' sake. And he said, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, I think daughter would apply as well, but especially for the sons, this is instruction provided by inspiration. And this son will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him or disciplined him, will not heed them. Then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his city. And they shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Modern sensibility says that's a bit barbaric. But it was necessary for order in society to be maintained. Notice just a couple of things. This isn't on the PowerPoint nor in your handout, but something that I think is important to at least highlight. If this son, again, daughter would be included, I think, as well, if this child will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, what do you think that little phraseology means to communicate? Parental authority is what? Vested in whom? Father and mother. Now, we've all played the game when we were children. We've had it played on us by our children. I don't know who first started it, if that was Cain and Abel. The Bible doesn't tell us that they did. But wherever it started, we don't need to entertain it. The idea, of course, is, can I do this? And if Dad says no, then I'll do what? Go ask Mom. And what does Mom do? What did Dad say? And vice versa, back and forth. Sometimes that's the way that it works and should work. But sometimes children, because they are very intuitive, and we could add other words a little less flattering, like manipulative or otherwise, might say, maybe if Mom doesn't let me have my way, Dad will, or maybe if Dad doesn't, Mom will. And that back and forth, I can kind of wear them down. I can pit them against each other. I think just without saying here in Deuteronomy 21:18, will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, communicates their authority is equal and that they should be united, in their approach to parenting. When they have chastened him, so both of them involved. Go ahead.
I mentioned this before, but Doc told me that as harsh as this is, there's not a recorded incident of this ever happening.
Right.
Just so what side God is on in the situation.
Right. And John mentioned that there's never a record historically that this ever happened. And is that a byproduct of the law itself, or because even the people viewed it as too harsh? I guess it would be impossible to say. But, if part of my bedtime story, and it wasn't that severe, but there was enough in my bedtime stories and otherwise to know that, obedience will bring blessing and disobedience brings consequences and punishment. That's what we've told our three. It's what you've told yours in various forms or fashion. And you wouldn't threaten to take their life, but you should let them know that there would be penalty for misbehavior. And this child, this son, he was rebellious to that effect. Now, it was always fun, and I started this, and I did it with my grandmother, I guess, first, and then did it some with my parents as well. But the 90s were a fun time. You remember, Donahue and Jerry Springer and all of those guys that had the talk shows. I know I'm going way off script here, but every once in a while they would have a show and they'd bring out, some little pint-sized brat. That's the nice word to call him or her. And, and then they would bring out two bedraggled, parents, kind of walking like this. And, they sit down and they say, well, what's the problem? They said, well, we can't make him do anything. He does what he wants to do. He goes to bed when he wants to go. He eats what he wants to eat. He's a terror. And I remember watching that with my granny, and she was like Santa Claus. When she laughed all over, and she would just sit there and just slap her knee, and she said, boy, I'd like to get a hold of him. And, A good switch would, fix him. And most of us, what we're talking about, had an on and off switch. And that's the way that it was. Well, that's kind of what you have going on here. We can't make, anyway. Luke chapter 2, verse 51, you probably don't have to turn there because you remember, what's it say about Jesus? He's always our example in everything we study and every, lesson we teach or any command we give. We usually try to go back and say, can we see it in Jesus? And of course, if it's something that God expects, we can see it in Jesus because He met God's expectations perfectly. Well, did He do that as a child? Luke 2:51 says He did, right? He went down with them. That is after the search in Jerusalem. And I alluded to that, I think, Sunday night. Joseph and Mary, even though it was Mother's Day, she says, boy, why did you treat us like this? Why did you hide? And she was just expressing what a mother would naturally express. Son, we've sought you anxiously. We were worried and scared to death. Well, you should have come to the temple first. I have to be about my Father's business in my Father's house. The Bible says they didn't understand that statement, which He spoke to them. Now, maybe because of the feeling of trauma, and like I've always told you, I try to put myself in the Bible story. You're Joseph and Mary. And ladies, you can, again, appreciate the mother aspect. Guys will just have to look at it from the fatherly aspect. But either way, you've been given by God His Son to take care of. I believe, just like the Bible said in Psalm 127, our children are a heritage from the Lord. They're gifts from the Lord. But Jesus was a special gift from the Lord. We can all agree to that, right? And now you're tasked with raising God's Son and you've lost Him. I mean, to think of, being scared to death, it would probably be more than just a cliche. That would truly be, no doubt, how your feelings must be raging within you. And so when He says, I have to be about my Father's house, they're like, boy, your Father's house is back in Nazareth. That's where the carpenter shop is. Don't ever do this to us again. And so Luke just adds, Jesus, went down with them to Nazareth and was subject to them, submissive to them, obedient to them. But His mother kept all these things in her heart. Now, again, I don't know how that dynamic played out. I did it. My three have done it. We've all done it. We've argued with our parents as children. We've all argued with our children as parents. And, there's kind of that tug of war. Who knows more about, what's going on than the other? Who's right and who's wrong? Jesus could always say, I'm right. I know more about this than you do, right? Did He ever have those kind of debates or discussions with Joseph and Mary? I don't know. It's kind of just fun, a little bit comical maybe to speculate. Whatever, I don't mean to be, disrespectful to our Lord. What I do know is that He was obedient because that's what the law expected children to be then as well as now. His mother kept all these things in her heart. Mary, like mamas do, they store up those memories, and maybe she reflected on them later. Maybe when Luke wrote this gospel, he might have interviewed her to, get her thoughts on the matter again. And then, of course, the Bible said Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and favor with God and men. That favor with men would have included even with his parents, with society at large, because he was a submissive son. He honored by obeying. Well, we honor our parents by showing proper respect. The holiness code, how to be holy, that's what the book of Leviticus is all about. God said, if you want to be my special people, you have to obey my special law. It's just as simple as that. And I have stipulations concerning almost every facet of life. Leviticus 19 verse 3, every one of you shall revere. That's the way the New King James renders that word there, his mother and his father. Keep my Sabbaths, I am the Lord your God. But revere, respect them. That's not optional. If you want to be holy, if you want to be the special people of God, you need to treat your parents kindly, with kindness. Exodus 21 and verse 15, he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Verse 17, he who curses his father or mother shall surely be put to death. There's not an option here for disrespect that would be escalated to the point that it is maybe unfortunately in many homes today. Leviticus 20 verse 9, everyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother, his blood shall be upon him. He's responsible, in other words. Don't even show pity, so treat kindly. And then, how do we honor parents? Maybe in a very practical way. Point number 4 on your handout says that we provide for them when they cannot care for themselves. Here's where most of us tonight, of course, this is kind of the point that we're at. How do I honor my parents? Yes, for my first 18, 21, how many ever years that I'm under their care and their supervision, and they're aiding me on my path to adulthood. Okay, I'm past that point. What now? Well, still care for them, especially when they may not be able to care for themselves. Proverbs 23, verse 22, the wise man says, listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old. I've told you, I think, more than once, just in learning, I guess, you learn how to try to talk to people and encourage them. And I learned quite early on, even though I had made many, many trips with, to reference my grandmother earlier, to nursing facilities and things like that. When I was just starting out, as a young preacher doing that on my own, I remember going and visiting some of those places and, just trying to introduce myself to, some of the residents, or be they church members or otherwise. And then I would just, think it would be a wise choice, because I would see pictures on the wall or on, a nightstand of a family. Is that your family? Well, yeah, that's my son or that's my daughter. Those are my grandkids. And then I would follow up by saying, well, when did they come see you last? And I did that for a few years and I stopped, and usually don't do it now, because many times it would almost bring those people to to heartache and heartbreak and tears to their eyes to say, well, I got that picture in the mail last Christmas, but I've not seen them in many years. And then I was stupid enough to say, well, I guess they live, in a foreign country. No, they live 5 minutes down the road or something like that. I'm like, well, I'll keep eating my shoe here. What else can I say to make this person feel bad? And that's tragic. And so please let that not be said of any of us, that we would treat our parents in that way. Mark chapter 7, verses 9 to 13. In the first century, there was a practice that the Pharisees and other religious leaders had kind of invented. They called it Corban. Basically, you could designate your wealth to be given to God, kind of a gift in advance of your death, and then you didn't have to spend it on anybody else. Well, they said, well, that's a convenient workaround. I don't need to keep my parents up. There's no welfare. There's no social security. There's none of those social programs like today. So mom and dad, they'll just have to fend for themselves, because my wealth is dedicated to God. Now, I'm going to use it on myself as long as I've got it, but mom and dad, you're left out. 1 Samuel chapter 22. I did. 1 Samuel 22, there's a very interesting incident. We're studying David in VBS this year. We won't be studying this particular episode, but in 1 Samuel 22, David is on the run from Saul, and we will be studying about that somewhat. But a very just little detail that's mentioned, and then it's passed over, but I think it's very significant. As David was being chased by Saul in pursuit of his life, the Bible said, David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do with me, or do for me. So he brought them, that is his parents, before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. David was fearing for his life. He couldn't perform the duties of a son to Jesse. We don't know what his brothers were doing. He had many older brothers. We know that from when David fought Goliath, but evidently they weren't maybe keeping up their end of the bargain. So David even has to go to a foreign leader to say, let my parents find refuge here. And apparently the king of Moab granted that while he was being pursued, David being pursued by Saul. But again, he honored them. He took care of them when they couldn't care for themselves. And maybe no greater example, of course, where's Jesus? You remember where Jesus is in John 19. He's on the cross. And I remember I had the thought, and I don't know why, it just kind of came to me, one of those things that as I studied, it was Mother's Day, probably 2004. And I was preaching in Meridian, Mississippi, and I got up to speak that morning. I was talking about Jesus and Mary, and I said the only thing that Jesus had comfort in while on the cross was the sight of his mother. At least that the Bible explicitly mentions. Now, it doesn't say that he did, but I have to believe he felt better when he saw her, just for a brief moment perhaps. And I made that comment, and what was so remarkable to me, Cecil May was in the audience. He had visited that morning. If you don't know Dr. Cecil May, longtime Bible professor at Magnolia Bible College, dean of the School of Biblical Studies at Faulkner, and he was there visiting, and he said he learned something that morning. And as a 23-year-old, I was like, oh, I was amazed, that he would say that about something that I mentioned. But Jesus, looking down from the cross, said to John, what? Son, that's your mama now. Take care of her. That's my mother, but I've done all that I can do for her now. Now, could Jesus have done more? Of course, he's the Son of God, but showing us the importance of how we take care. He's now in charge, Mom. That's your son. He's going to take care of you just like he would his own mother. And the Bible says that's exactly what he did. So it's just a beautiful account that Jesus, even in that moment of terrible suffering and agony, took the time to honor his father and mother. Now the question, some would say, well, where's Joseph? Likely already dead. Joseph is not mentioned after the incident in Luke 2 when Jesus was 12. Not even mentioned in his ministry. Most scholars suppose that he has died by the time Jesus reappears at the age of 30 to begin his ministry following his baptism by John. Do we know that with 100% certainty? We don't. But that's a pretty good assumption, I think. So that's why John was entrusted with the care of Mary there.
Receive their respect with a peach tree.
Peach tree tea, yeah. I had a little bit of that to drink. And that helped communicate the message, didn't it? That discipline for sure. And while that's not as much what we're talking about tonight, the discipline aspect of it, the duty to honor and to respect is there. Well, do we still honor Dad and Mom today? Of course. Ephesians 6:1-4 makes that clear. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's the right thing to do. It's what God expects and desires. Honor your father and mother. That's the first commandment with promise. Why? That it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Now, the original promise pertained to the land of Canaan, and I've got that notated in your handout. Today, while we do not have a physical land with geographical boundaries that is promised us, there's now still, I think, the idea that we are to obey and honor our parents because of the wisdom they have. And should we do that, then in most cases we will have a better life, a more blessed life. The failure to obey parents, interestingly enough, is listed in Ezekiel 22:6-16, along with other sins that cause the people to go into captivity, among other things. And one of the things God says, you have taken and regarded your parents lightly. Remember, the word honor means to make heavy. Ezekiel says you have regarded your parents lightly. So there's kind of a play on words as that goes. Romans 1:30 lists disobedience to parents along with a lot of other bad stuff that we'd all say, I don't want to be guilty of that, but it's listed in the same catalog of sins. Likewise in 2 Timothy 3:1-5. In the last days, are we in the last days? Well, yes, the gospel age we are. Perilous times will come. People will love pleasure more than God. They'll be disrespectful. They'll be arrogant. And they'll be conniving and sly and deceptive. And they'll be, among other things, Paul says, disobedient to parents. So here we are, even then. And I've already talked about the promise as it attached to the original recipients was the land of Canaan. For us today, it's just kind of a good life in general of pleasing God to keep the command as He gives it. So that's what's attached to it today. Now, here's where I want very quickly to conclude by asking, who is to blame when children do not obey or honor, respect their parents? Whose fault is it? Okay, someone got right to the point. Appreciate Donald saying that. It's both. It may be Junior or Sally. I've never known what the junior female form is, but anyways, it might be the case that the children do not obey. But have dad and mom expected that of them? Have they taught them to honor and to respect them? If they haven't, then why should we expect them to do that? And so there's fault on both parties for sure, and that's something we must be very aware of and make sure as parents we're doing those things. 1 Timothy 3 mentions of leading or managing your household well. That's not just for elders, that's for any Christian man, although an elder must excel in that regard. Can a child, Beth?
The adult in the relationship and not a buddy.
There you go.
They need to set the guidelines, not let the children set the guidelines.
Parents have to remain the authority, in charge, not friends, but parents. In time, as they get older, maybe that kind of transitions a little bit. But if you've done your work on the front end, that'll be much easier for sure. But there is, and we're not even touching on any of the various child-rearing theories, Dr. Spock or otherwise, not the Star Trek guy, but there's a whole sort of thing. The positive parenting movement was something a few years ago that you never tell your child no, you always reframe it or whatever. My mom and daddy didn't believe in that. Yours probably didn't either. But anyway, can a child obey without honoring? I think so. You might have heard of the little boy. His name wasn't Alan, but anyways, his consequence, he was finally forced, and he was told after repeated warnings and a few applications of the Board of Education to his backside, he finally sat down and was trying to be still. And his parents look over at him and he's got a smirk on his face and he said, well, I'm standing up on the inside. Standing up on the inside. I've been there, yeah, too. You can obey without honoring, but here the command to honor is more all-encompassing than that. Yes, obey, but honor simultaneously. And then here, maybe it's not, I don't think it should be controversial, but does this command have an expiration date? The honoring part does not. Maybe if you want to be very precise, you would say honoring your parents never has an expiration date. Obeying your parents, yes, it might. In fact, I think it should. When you become an adult, your parents can ask. They might make requests of you, but you would not be obligated to obey them as you would when you were a child. So we have to, I think, understand that distinction and understand, that there has to be not the enmeshment that might have characterized in childhood, and even enmeshment's a strong word to use, but a differentiation once the child reaches adulthood. But the command to honor should never, be expired. And whatever you do that, of course, coming from the funeral industry, what we would tell you is, visit the graveside of your parents when you can. Make sure things are in order in that regard if you have that responsibility. If you're charged, for instance, with taking care of their finances when they become incapacitated, you don't use that for self-indulgence. You use that to take care of them. It has multitudes of applications, and it doesn't have an expiration date as it relates to honor. Adulthood might modify the command, of course, to obey. And then the last thing, how can we honor our parents in their sunset years? We need to visit, we need to help, we need to care, we need to provide. We have to live our lives and take care of our family unit. Your spouse takes priority over your parents, but it shouldn't be relegated, to some sort of competition if all parties are healthy. I know sometimes you have to work through that. You have to set boundaries in that regard. We talk a lot about doing things like that when we go through premarital counseling with couples. You have to understand how to do that, and sometimes it gets messy. I know probably some of you, not all, could share stories where it's been messy with your adult kids in various ways, but that's a hard thing to work through. Amy and I are both trying to figure out, and they'll record this, so I'm going to get in trouble later, but how do you help parents who don't want you to help them when they need the help that you need to give them? Well, my mama breaks 3 vertebrae in her back because she decides to lift her John Deere lawnmower instead of calling me. What do you do in cases like that? I don't know, but we keep trying, we keep learning, we keep growing. Honor father and mother. Any other questions or comments? I've meant to show you this picture the whole time. You may wonder what that is. That's the 10 Commandments in Hebrew. That is posted outside the tomb of King David in Jerusalem. If you visit Jerusalem today, you'll see that kind of has a placard there. That's the Ten Commandments, what they look like in Hebrew. A little less wordy than they look in English, but that's the Hebrew script of it. All righty, well, next week come back and we'll look at commandment number 6. We'll start to get into some more of the thou shalt nots, and we'll look at how these relate to what we do with each other. And we hope you'll be with us to study that lesson then.